I'll try to bring as much clarity as I can around all of these concepts. There are a lot of things packed in these few readings, and I'd like to try to bring as much clarity as I can, but of course there might be different interpretation of those texts. I just want to try to throw some ideas out there, and partly the way this can relate to our topic, which is computer science. So I'll start with the very the most basic ideas here when we are more interested in the question of art, technique. We have three main elements, if I can say. We have a maker, right? We have an activity that starts at a certain point in time and extended through time and end at a certain point with end product. And here we have an activity of making. So these have very specific Greek concepts associated with them. For instance, the activity is called energeia, and the sorry about that. And the making itself is called poiesis. And the end usually is called ergon, and the product derived from poiesis is poieton. Okay, but so that's the main picture. What is interesting is to ask ourselves, well, where does computation fit in there? And I think in this specific case where we have this end product, this activity of making, of course we can relate it to software development pretty easily, and a lot of you have made this really good connection. Now, what I would like to see is, well, to which extent the activity can be associated with the computational activity itself, right? If we assume that this is a computer, sorry for terrible drawing, because there is something about something extended through time in computation that resemble a human activity in some way. So partly when we ask the question of ethics, I think this is an important question to ask, and I'd like us to investigate this a little bit more. For that, the first thing we should do is really clarify these concepts and the relationship between them. Okay, so we have on one end the first so if we consider, sorry, the zooming automatically goes back to, I don't know why. We start, so we're going to start with just the context of making first. So techne here. Start with the maker. Okay, and the maker has a certain capacity. Okay, so that sounds like very basic, but this is one of the things that this kind of analysis that the Greek did is provides for us, is a rigorous separation of the concepts. The maker is different from the capacity, even though the capacity is in some sense in the maker, right? At some point it's very clear. Aristotle says that capacity origin is in the maker. so it origins in the maker, but it is different concept, right? These are different, right? So the capacity itself is actually specifically called a reason capacity or a reason state of capacity. It's kind of a complex term they use here. I'm gonna put this a bit higher, the making, because I need more space. Because I'm just going to add so this notion of reason capacity. Not going to use the complete term reason state of capacity. It's too long. But this reason capacity is basically a capacity based on rationality, but like how to say it, a technical rationality, an artistic in the sense of large sense rationality, right? And so for Aristotle, this capacity is itself the art, right? So so that's the key concept here. This is equal to the art, the techne. So that's the first important thing. Then the capacity itself is concerned with. Sorry, I have my baby here making some little noises. Is concerned with. The capacity is concerned with operation or activity, right? It's a certain activity, sometimes called operation more by Aquinas. And same thing, right? The capacity itself is different from the activity. The activity is really what we drew here in our first diagram. Okay, so same thing. These two things are different. And the activity as an end in the final product, right? And same thing. These two things are different, right? So okay. So what else do we learn in this text? We also learn, and Aquinas is a bit more clear. That's more like a thing. The relationship of means to end here, right? The activity is in itself not an end. It cannot be just done for its own sake, and that's something quite important actually. What follows, right? Because that's going to have some impact. It means, can you just do software engineering for doing software engineering? Apparently not, right? This is just a means, right? Here we just have a means, right, to an end. So that distinguishes them, like ontologically, they have different status with respect to ethics and making. One is really just a means, one is an end. And for that reason, both Aristotle and Aquinas tell us that the end is by definition better than the mean, right? The mean. So, sorry, baby is not happy. So that means that here we have a certain relationship of better than or more important than, right? Better / more important than. Okay, so the product is more important and better than the activity itself. That's something important to take into consideration. Now, with respect to good and bad, because in the end that's what ethics is about, right? When we talk about making, there is a big distinction with the action itself, with acting, and for Aristotle, acting and making are completely different. So, where is the good and bad located in this case? Well, in the text we learn two things. At some point, we learn that it can be located in the reason capacity. That there is some goodness there that actually is, for Aristotle, more has to do with true and false reasoning, right? So it's more true-false course of reasoning here. So I'm gonna put that in red here. True, false course of reasoning that is attached to this. But in the end, what determines where the good is located is not as much in the maker or in the activity. It is really in the product. The product is what is going to be good or bad, right? And of course, there is a direct correlation here, right? Sorry again, baby is being very talkative these days. And so there is a direct correlation between the true-false course of reasoning. So it's kind of surprising to see true and false being used in this case, because I'm going to have to pause and continue later. Baby sleeping. So what I was saying is that the true-false really is about the course of reasoning for the capacity. So basically, false course of reasoning would be like skipping a step or making the wrong succession of steps or something like that in the creation of a product, right? In the activity. So if the person doesn't really master the art and doesn't know the right steps, it's going to lead to a bad product. That's where the connection lies, which is interesting because this notion of steps and course of reasoning is should remind us of what happens in during the execution of a computer program, right? Or what a bug is basically in some sense a false course of reasoning. So we'll get back to that later on. Okay, so that's from the making perspective. Now, just to look at the acting perspective, because for Aristotle, making and doing or acting are two different things, which can be surprising, because we usually think that every making is a kind of doing, although every doing is not a making, right? That's the way but for him, no, there are two actually distinct activities, and I think it's worth looking a little bit at that. So the second one is acting or doing, right? And in this case, you basically what you don't have is the end product. There is no end product, right? We just have in the case of acting, we just have so a maker, sorry, a person, not a maker. An actor would not be a good choice of words. So we have a person acting person, if you want, and then we have this still the capacity here, and the capacity is it's still a reason capacity. But or reason state of capacity, but the first one is a reason capacity of making. This one is a reason capacity of acting, right? This reason capacity is equated for Aristotle with what he calls practical wisdom. It's equated with practical wisdom, which in Greek is called phronesis. Is it phronesis? I have a doubt. So I'm not. Yes, it's phronesis. Yes. So back. So this is phronesis. Okay. So it's equated with practical wisdom. So instead of art, we have here practical wisdom, and practical wisdom is concerned with. So far it really looks like the making case is concerned with also an activity, but this time this was activity of making, right? Concerned with making. Here it's concerned with really acting, which can also be considered as a energeia, right? But in this case, the Greek word is praxis. So praxis would be the equivalent of what here is poiesis, right? The making, okay? So praxis is the activity that results from phronesis. Poiesis is the activity that results from techne. Okay, so what is really interesting, however, is that there's no end product. We could think, well, there is, right? When you do something, well, for Aristotle, no, the end product is the acting itself. The acting has as an end itself. So he's going to take the example of, exercising. Why do you exercise? Well, I exercise for health. But why do you want to be healthy? I want to be healthy for the sake of being healthy. So in the end, just virtues, health, justice, courage, all these activities have themselves as an end. You don't want to be courageous for the sake of anything else than just being courageous. And same thing for health. You just want to be healthy just to be healthy, right? So that's the idea. So the activity has itself an end, which means that the goodness is going to be in the activity itself, right? So the goodness or the badness is going to be in the activity itself, and that's what Aristotle calls someone with a practical wisdom. It's just someone who is able to discern good activity from bad, good acting from bad acting. What is basically good for man or bad for man. Okay, that's his definition. We don't need to worry too much about that because this is not as crucial for what we're interested in, because we're more concerned with the making here in this case. But it's still important to understand what acting is, so that we don't confuse too much what is proper to techne and what is proper to phronesis, what is part of art, craft, and what is part of practical wisdom and good action. Sometimes there is confusion, and when we talk too quickly about ethics, there's a lot of confusion. What's interesting also is that here the good or bad, true or false, seem to be mostly in the product and in the reason capacity itself, not necessarily in the person. Doesn't make the person, to have the good capacity doesn't make the person good. While here, the good or bad of the activity has a direct impact on the good or bad of the acting person, right? And we're not going to go into details, but basically Aristotle has this whole thing about that's a whole virtue ethics theory that by doing virtuous things, we become more virtuous. We become better by doing good things. We're not just good or bad. It's just like a training muscle that is a muscle that is trained through the activity. So, okay. So now let's pause a little bit and try to recapitulate what we have here. So we have several capacity. If I can draw like that, it's kind of strange, but in our person, there is, we just saw the capacity of art, techne. We have practical wisdom. And we have a third one that we didn't really explore, talk about yet, which is scientific knowledge. And so Aristotle spends quite some time separating the three, showing that they are actually different, they can't be the same. Scientific knowledge really is about pure reason. While art, as we just said, is going to be the reasoned capacity to make. Here in this case, make. And in the case of practical wisdom, the reasoned capacity to act. So very different for Aristotle, two different things. So here in this case, for instance, make what? Well, it can be, software engineering can be a reasoned capacity to make. Okay. Okay. Now what's interesting is to look at, what are they concerned with, right? Pure reason is really concerned with things. So that's going to be our concerned with arrow, right? We're going to explore what these three are concerned with. We already looked at this too. This is concerned with the coming into being of things that could be or not be. So we didn't really look at it that way, but seems pretty obvious that making is about making, having something that could be or not be come into being. So coming into being of what could be or not be. Well, acting is concerned with things that are good or bad for man. So looking at that, it looks like ethics is closer to this, right? Pure reason, on the other hand, and scientific knowledge is really concerned with things that are the necessity and the eternal things. So, or as Aristotle put it, the inviolable, right? So these things are inviolable. So trying to find another color here. Things that could not be otherwise, right? So here an example could be, undecidability. Which is the topic of computation theory. So most of the theorems we see in computation theory sits right here, right? On the other hand, these two things are about things that are viable. Okay? About things that could be otherwise. Okay, so that there is a very important distinction here for Aristotle. There's another interesting thing to notice is that here the end is itself, and same thing here, while here the end is always an external product. Okay. The major focus of ethics when we when we look at ethics in general is going to be here, which kind of makes sense because we talk about the good and the bad, right? But I didn't mean to do that. But this is not this is not the only. It's not the only capacity of man, right? There is art as well, making and scientific knowledge. And all of these belong to Aristotle's treatise on ethics, even though, of course, he spent more time talking about this third one, because it's the most important one. Now, because the focus is here, we tend to think everything having to do computer science in terms of this. But if we look more carefully, what we study in computer science, what we do, what the activity we engage in is actually more, here and here, right? It's actually mostly here because it's mostly about making, engineering, building softwares, etc., building computers. There is an aspect having to do with scientific knowledge, of course, when we study algorithm or complexity or computation theory, computability, all of this, we are really here. But I want to make this distinction that, I want to emphasize the point that we tend to confuse all of these three levels into one and forget that this distinction, which can make us confuse pure reason, scientific knowledge with art, and art with practical wisdom. If computer science is mostly here, maybe we should look at these more and think in terms of these a little bit more than in terms of acting, right? Even though, as human beings, we act as computer scientists in a company. You're going to be doing action, and there's always some discernment to make about is this good or bad. But the question to ask is it really the activity you engage in when you're actually coding, which is the core of what we do? Is it act or is it make? And I would tend to think we're actually more in the domain of art, technique, and making, right? Okay, so that's a lot. I was trying to synthesize most of the core concept of these texts. Now, what would be interesting from there is to try to think, well, okay, most of you, almost all of you, have identified the maker with the software. In the context of making, some of you have, I think, made sometimes this confusion between making and acting. So it's interesting to maybe try to clarify that a little bit. But if we focus on making, right, which we just said should be probably our main focus, then we could try to think. Okay, so the most of you have identified the maker with the software engineer, and the capacity is this art of building software. The activity is the design, specification, requirements, and then the implementation, all of that, and the product is going to be the software itself, right? And that's fine. Oh. But I would like to try to think, well, if we think of this activity as the activity of a computer actually computing something, right? Well, and the end product could be either an output, right? Or maybe there is no end product. Maybe it's just the activity itself for the sake of itself in the context of acting. I don't know. But if we think of the activity as being a computational activity here, what does it mean for all the rest? You know, how does it impact what the maker is, what the capacity is, what the product is, and same thing here maybe. You know, how does it impact what this is, what this is, what this is? It seems there's something new here that the Greeks didn't think of because it just didn't exist, right? Didn't exist. I don't think there exists anything comparable to the activity of a computer, which is complex enough, rich enough to, I think, ask this question. What is the activity itself? Is not that of a man building, furniture out of wood, but of a computer building something or computing something. That's a computational activity here. So that's the question I would like to leave you with.